My wife's sister mocked me over dinner. She said I looked cheap. That my laugh was annoying. All in Spanish, thinking I was clueless. I smiled the entire time. Then, right before I left, I turned to my wife's sister and her family and responded to every single insult. In perfect Spanish. You know how some stories start with "it was love at first sight"? Well, mine started with a champagne flute and really bad small talk at a charity gala downtown. 2 years ago, I was just another guy in a rented tux trying not to spill anything on myself while rich people threw money at causes they'd forget about by Tuesday. I was there for work. My logistics consulting firm had sponsored a table, and somehow I'd drawn the short straw to represent us at this thing. That's when I saw her. Bella. She was standing by the silent auction table, laughing so hard at something her friend said that she had to steady herself against the wall. And man, that laugh. It wasn't one of those polite little giggles you hear at these fancy events. It was full-throated, genuine, the kind of laugh that made everyone around her start smiling even if they didn't know what was funny. Her dark hair was pulled back in some kind of elegant updo that probably cost more than my car payment. But she kept reaching up to tuck loose strands behind her ears like she was nervous about it coming undone. I watched her for maybe 10 minutes before I worked up the nerve to walk over. She was bidding on a weekend getaway to some vineyard in Napa, and I made some dumb joke about how the winning bid would probably cost more than my mortgage. She turned around, and I swear to God, those brown eyes of hers just lit up when she smiled. "You're not from around here, are you?" she asked, and I could hear just a hint of an accent underneath her words. "That obvious?" I said, tugging at my bow tie. "I'm Marcus, and you're right. I'm more of a beer and pizza kind of guy than champagne and caviar." "Bella," she said, extending her hand. "And honestly, me too. I'm only here because my hospital makes us come to these things. I'm a pediatric nurse at Children's Hospital." We ended up talking for the rest of the night. She told me about her work, how she'd gotten into nursing because she wanted to help kids, how she'd moved here from San Diego 5 years ago for the job. I told her about my business, how I'd started out doing logistics for shipping companies and somehow ended up consulting for everyone from tech startups to manufacturing plants. We discovered we both hated small talk, but were weirdly good at it. Both preferred hiking to clubbing, and both thought the chicken they were serving tasted like cardboard. "My family's going to love you," she said as the evening was winding down, and something in the way she said it made me think that wasn't necessarily a good thing. "Why's that?" I asked. "Because you're normal," she said, laughing. "They're used to me dating guys who think they're God's gift to women. You seem, I don't know, real." We exchanged numbers, and I walked her to her car, a practical Honda Civic that somehow made me like her even more. Most of the women at this thing were climbing into BMWs and Mercedes. Bella unlocked her car and turned back to me. "Fair warning," she said. "My family's a lot. They're loud, they're opinionated, and they have zero filter. Especially my sister Valeria. Loud families I can handle," I said. "I grew up with 3 brothers." She smiled, but there was something else in her expression, something I couldn't quite read. "They don't really speak much English around new people," she said. "It's not personal, it's just, they're more comfortable in Spanish. I hope that's okay." I nodded, thinking about the 3 years I'd spent working in Mexico City, the contracts I'd negotiated entirely in Spanish, the friends I'd made who'd taught me slang I probably shouldn't repeat in polite company. But something told me to keep that information to myself, at least for now. "No problem," I said. "I'm sure we'll figure it out." She kissed me on the cheek, just a quick, friendly peck, but I felt it all the way down to my toes. "I had a really good time tonight, Marcus," she said. "Text me." "Already planning on it," I said. I watched her drive away, then spent the entire ride home thinking about that laugh of hers and the way she'd tucked her hair behind her ear when she was nervous about something. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I just knew I wanted to see her again. Looking back now, I realized that was the moment I started playing a role I didn't even know I was auditioning for. The nice guy? The harmless American boyfriend who didn't understand the language, didn't catch the jokes, didn't pick up on the subtle insults. But here's the thing about being underestimated. It gives you power that people don't see coming. And sometimes, when you've been quiet long enough, when you've smiled through enough condescension and nodded through enough barely concealed contempt, you realize that silence isn't always weakness. Sometimes it's strategy. And sometimes, just sometimes, It's the calm before the storm. A year into our marriage, and I thought I had Bella figured out. She was spontaneous but reliable, passionate but practical, the kind of woman who'd cry during commercials about rescue dogs, but could also negotiate a better deal on our car insurance without breaking a sweat. We'd settled into this comfortable rhythm. Morning coffee together before work, takeout dinners while binge-watching Netflix shows, lazy Sunday mornings that stretched into early afternoon. Then she dropped the bomb. "My family wants to have you over for Sunday dinner," she said one Tuesday night, not looking up from her laptop, where she was reviewing patient charts. She said it like she was mentioning we were out of milk, but I caught the way her shoulders tensed up. "That sounds great," I said, which was partly true. I'd been curious about her family ever since that first mention at the gala. In the year we'd been married, I'd met them exactly twice. Briefly at our wedding, where they were polite but distant, and once at a restaurant for Bella's birthday, where the conversation stayed safely in English and focused on neutral topics like the weather and how good the food was. "Yeah, it'll be fun," Bella said, still not looking at me. "Just be yourself, you know? But keep it low-key." I paused in the middle of folding laundry. "Keep it low-key how?" She finally looked up, and I could see she was choosing her words carefully. "It's just that Valeria can be a little judgmental, and my mom gets nervous when she thinks people are trying too hard to impress her. So just, be casual. Don't feel like you have to prove anything." There it was. The first red flag, waving right in front of my face, and I almost missed it because I was too focused on the fact that my wife's family finally wanted to spend time with me. "Judgmental how?" I asked. Bella closed her laptop and rubbed her temples. "She just has opinions about everything, okay? What people wear, how they talk, where they work. She made my last boyfriend feel like garbage because he showed up in a polo shirt instead of a button-down. I just don't want her to give you a hard time." I should have asked more questions. I should have pushed back on the idea that I needed to change anything about myself to make her sister comfortable. Instead, I found myself nodding along, already mentally going through my closet to figure out what would pass Valeria's apparent dress code. "Don't worry about it," I said. "I can handle a little judgment." Bella smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You're the best, you know that? Most guys would be freaking out about meeting the family properly for the first time. I want them to like me," I said, and I meant it. "You're important to me, which means they're important to me." The next few days, Bella kept bringing up little details about the dinner. Her mom was making her famous mole recipe. Her dad would probably want to talk about business, so I should be ready to discuss logistics consulting. Valeria might ask about our plans for kids, which was apparently her favorite topic for making people uncomfortable. "Just remember," Bella said the night before, "they're not used to outsiders. It takes them a while to warm up to new people." Outsiders. You know what I mean. People who aren't family. People who don't speak Spanish as their first language. I almost told her then. About the 3 years in Mexico City. About the contracts I'd negotiated entirely in Spanish. About how I'd lived with a host family in Guadalajara during college and learned to curse like a sailor in 2 languages. About how I'd kept up with Mexican telenovelas for years after I moved back to the States, partly to maintain my fluency and partly because they were genuinely entertaining. But something held me back. Maybe it was the way she kept emphasizing how different her family was, like speaking Spanish was some kind of exotic trait instead of the second most common language in the country. Maybe it was the way she seemed to expect me to fail at impressing them. Or maybe it was just that I was curious to see how they'd act around someone they thought couldn't understand them. So I kept my mouth shut. Sunday morning, I spent way too long picking out what to wear. I settled on a navy button-down that Bella had bought me for Christmas. Conservative, expensive-looking, but not too flashy. The kind of shirt that said, "I have good taste, but I'm not trying to show off." I paired it with dark jeans and the leather shoes I usually save for client meetings. I stopped at the wine shop on the way over and spent 20 minutes with the guy behind the counter, trying to find something that would impress without looking like I was trying too hard. I ended up with a bottle of Tempranillo that cost more than I usually spend on wine, but wasn't so expensive that it would seem like I was showing off. The drive to her parents' house took me through one of the nicer neighborhoods in town, where the houses got bigger and the lawns got more manicured with every block. When I pulled up to the address Bella had given me, I had to double-check the numbers. The house was massive. All glass and white stone, with a circular driveway and landscaping that probably cost more than my annual salary. I sat in my car for a minute, wine bottle in my lap, trying to psych myself up. This was it. The real introduction to the family. The chance to prove that I was good enough for their daughter, that I belonged in their world. I had no idea I was walking into an ambush. I knocked on the front door at exactly 6 o'clock, wine bottle in one hand, and what I hoped was a confident smile on my face. The door was one of those heavy wooden things that probably cost more than my car, with frosted glass panels that let me see movement inside, but not much else. Bella opened it, and I could immediately tell she was nervous. She was wearing a black dress I'd never seen before, her hair pulled back in a way that looked effortless, but probably took her an hour to perfect. She kissed me on the cheek, but it felt performative, like she was already putting on a show for whoever was watching from inside. "You look great," she whispered, straightening my collar even though it didn't need straightening. "Remember what I said, okay? Just be yourself." But, low-key, I finished. I got it. She led me through a foyer that was bigger than our entire living room, past a staircase that curved up to the second floor like something out of a movie. The walls were covered with family photos in expensive-looking frames, Bella at various ages, graduation photos, vacation pictures from places I recognized but had never been able to afford to visit. The living room was exactly what I'd expected based on the outside of the house. Everything was white or cream or some shade of beige that probably had a fancy name like champagne or bone. The furniture looked like it belonged in a museum, the kind of stuff you're afraid to sit on because you might leave a wrinkle. Fresh flowers in crystal vases, coffee table books that looked like they'd never been opened, carpet so thick and pristine I felt guilty walking on it with my shoes. "Mom, Dad," Bella called out, her voice pitched slightly higher than usual. "Marcus is here." Camila appeared first, emerging from what I assumed was the kitchen. She was an older version of Bella, but where Bella's features were soft and warm, her mother's seemed carved from stone. She was beautiful in that intimidating way that made you immediately aware of every flaw in your own appearance. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless despite the fact that she'd presumably been cooking all day. She wore a cream-colored blouse that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "Marcus," she said, extending her hand for a handshake instead of going for a hug. Her grip was firm but brief, like she was afraid of catching something. "Welcome to our home. Thank you so much for having me, Mrs. Rivera," I said, offering her the wine. "I brought this for dinner." She took the bottle and examined the label like she was checking for forgeries. "How thoughtful," she said in a tone that managed to sound grateful and condescending at the same time. Arturo came in from the back patio, still holding a rocks glass with what looked like expensive whiskey. He was shorter than I'd expected, but he carried himself like a much taller man. Everything about him screamed money. The watch that caught the light every time he moved his wrist, the shoes that were definitely Italian, the way his hair was styled in that effortless way that only comes from very expensive haircuts. "So you're the famous Marcus," he said, shaking my hand. His grip was designed to test me, just a little too firm, held just a little too long. "Bella talks about you constantly." "All good things, I hope," I said, and immediately regretted it. It sounded desperate, like I was fishing for compliments. "Of course," he said, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. That's when Valeria made her entrance. I'd heard enough about Bella's older sister to know she was going to be a problem, but nothing could have prepared me for the reality of her. She swept into the room like she owned it, which I guess she kind of did. She was taller than Bella, with the kind of confidence that came from never having been told no about anything important. Her dress probably cost more than my car, and she wore it like armor. "You must be Marcus," she said, looking me up and down like she was evaluating livestock. "I'm Valeria. Bella's told us so much about you." The way she said it made it clear that whatever Bella had told them wasn't particularly impressive. "It's great to finally meet you," I said, and I meant it. I'd been curious about this woman who apparently had such strong opinions about her sister's choice in men. "Likewise," she said, settling into one of the white chairs like a queen taking her throne. "So, logistics consulting. That sounds practical." There was something in the way she said practical that made it sound like a dirty word. "It keeps me busy," I said. "I help companies streamline their supply chains, reduce costs, that kind of thing." "How nice," Camila said, returning from the kitchen where she'd presumably stashed my wine. "Very useful work." Again with the tone, like being useful was somehow beneath them. The conversation continued like that for the next 20 minutes. Polite questions that felt like tiny tests, compliments that were actually insults, smiles that never quite reached anyone's eyes. I complimented the house, the decor, the smell of whatever was cooking in the kitchen. I asked about their work, their hobbies, their opinions on safe, neutral topics. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, they began to relax around me. Not because they liked me, but because they'd decided I wasn't a threat. I was exactly what they'd expected, the bland American husband who didn't quite measure up to their standards but was harmless enough to tolerate. That's when the real conversation started. ¿Cuándo van a empezar a hablar de niños? Valeria asked her mother, speaking in rapid Spanish. I kept my face carefully blank, my expression mildly interested but clearly uncomprehending. Inside, I was translating every word. When are they going to start talking about kids? Del tiempo, Camila replied. Apenas ese casaron. Give it time. They just got married. I smiled politely and took a sip of the cocktail Arturo had made me, letting my eyes wander around the room like I was admiring the art instead of listening to every syllable they spoke. The performance had begun. Dinner was announced with all the ceremony of a state dinner. Camila had gone all out. The dining room table was set with china that looked like it belonged in a museum, crystal glasses that caught the light from an actual chandelier, cloth napkins folded into some kind of complicated origami shape. The whole setup screamed money and tradition, the kind of meal where you're supposed to use the right fork and keep your elbows off the table. I let Bella guide me to my seat, directly across from Valeria and next to Arturo, who was already refilling his whiskey glass. The positioning felt deliberate, like I was being put on display for easy observation and judgment. This looks incredible, I said as Camila brought out the first course, some kind of salad with ingredients I couldn't identify, but that looked expensive and artfully arranged. You really didn't have to go to all this trouble. It's no trouble, Camila said, but the way she said it suggested it was actually quite a lot of trouble, and I should be appropriately grateful. Bella squeezed my hand under the table. Mom's an amazing cook, she said. Wait until you try the duck. I took a bite of the salad and made the appropriate appreciative noises. It was good. Everything was perfectly seasoned, the ingredients obviously high quality, but I could feel 3 pairs of eyes watching my every move, cataloging every reaction. That's when the Spanish started in earnest. ¿Qué piensas? Valeria asked her mother, her voice casual, but her eyes fixed on me. What do you think? I kept chewing, my expression politely attentive but blank, like I was trying to follow a conversation I couldn't understand. Paris, simple, Camila replied carefully. He seems simple. Simple. The word hit me like a slap, but I kept my face neutral, even managed a small smile as I reached for my water glass. Simple como? Arturo asked, leaning back in his chair. Simple how? Como pan blanco, Valeria said with a little laugh. Se ve bien, pero no tiene sabor. Like white bread. He looks fine, but he has no flavor. I almost choked on my water. Not from shock. I'd been expecting something like this, but from the sheer audacity of it. They were talking about me like I was a piece of furniture, rating my worth while I sat right there. Valeria, Bella said, but she was laughing a little too. Sé amable. Be nice. Estoy siendo amable, Valeria replied. Could be worse. At least he's not ugly. I'm being nice. I took another bite of salad and complimented the dressing, my voice warm and grateful. This is really delicious, Mrs. Rivera. I'd love the recipe if you don't mind sharing. Camila smiled that tight smile again. It's a family recipe. Very complicated. V.S. Valeria said to her mother. En I siquiera sabe que es una vinagreta básica. See, he doesn't even know it's basic vinaigrette. The main course arrived, roasted duck with some kind of fruit sauce, potatoes that had been turned into tiny, perfect sculptures, vegetables arranged like abstract art. It was the kind of meal that belonged in a restaurant with cloth napkins and wine lists, not a family dinner. This is incredible, I said, and I meant it. Whatever else I could say about this family, they knew their way around food. I feel like I'm in a 5-star restaurant. Arturo used to own restaurants, Bella said proudly. 3 of them, before he sold the business. That's amazing, I said, turning to Arturo. What kind of cuisine? High-end Mexican, he said. Real Mexican food, not the garbage they serve at chain restaurants. I'd love to hear more about that, I said. The restaurant business must be incredibly challenging. As Arturo launched into stories about his restaurant days, Valeria and Camila continued their commentary. Has visto como corta la carne? Valeria whispered to her mother. Have you seen how he cuts his meat? I glanced down at my plate. I was cutting my duck the way I'd always cut meat. Practical, efficient, getting the job done. Como un niño, Camila replied. Like a child. Yesa risa, Valeria added. Suena como si estuviera fingiendo. And that laugh. It sounds like he's faking it. I had been laughing at Arturo's story about a customer who'd insisted on ordering tacos at his upscale restaurant, and then complained that they weren't authentic enough. It was actually pretty funny, but apparently my sense of humor was also deficient. ¿Crees que tiene dinero? Camila asked quietly. Do you think he has money? Miralo, Valeria said. Esa camisa es de Target. Sus zapatos están gastados. Look at him. That shirt is from Target, and his shoes are worn out. The shirt was actually from Nordstrom, and the shoes were less than 6 months old, but I wasn't about to correct them. I was too busy filing away every insult, every casual cruelty, every assumption they were making about me. Poor Bella. Valeria continued in Spanish. She could have done so much better. Remember David? Now he had class. David. The name hit like a punch to the gut. Bella had mentioned him exactly once. Her ex-fiancé who'd left her 6 months before their wedding for his secretary. Apparently, he'd been the family favorite. David understood quality. Camila agreed. This one, como ese dice? Generic. I complimented the potatoes. I asked about the wine pairing. I made small talk about the weather and how beautiful their neighborhood was. All while they dissected my appearance, my mannerisms, my worth as a human being. He's like Wonder Bread, Valeria said finally, switching back to English for a moment to ask me to pass the salt, then immediately returning to Spanish. Pale, soft, no taste. Nothing interesting about him at all. I passed the salt with a smile. The worst part wasn't even the insults themselves. It was watching Bella laugh along with them. Every time Valeria made some cutting remark in Spanish about my appearance or my mannerisms, every time Camila wondered aloud whether I was smart enough to handle a successful Latino woman, every time Arturo questioned my earning potential or my ambition, Bella would let out this little laugh. Not a mean laugh, exactly, but not a defensive one either. More like the sound someone makes when they're trying to keep the peace, when they're afraid that standing up for someone might rock the boat. Probably doesn't even know how to dance, Valeria was saying, gesturing at me with her wine glass. Look at him, all stiff and awkward. But he thinks salsa is something you put on chips. Bella giggled. Actually giggled. Like her sister making fun of her husband's supposed lack of rhythm was the funniest thing she'd heard all week. I took another sip of wine and smiled blandly, letting my eyes wander around the dining room like I was admiring the artwork instead of memorizing every word of their casual character assassination. The wine was good, probably cost more than I usually spend on groceries in a month, but it wasn't doing much to take the edge off what was turning into the longest dinner of my life. He probably thinks Taco Tuesday is authentic Mexican cuisine, Arturo added, and this time even Camila laughed. Dad? Bella said in English, but she was still smiling when she said it. Be nice. We are being nice, Valeria replied in Spanish. We're being very nice. Much nicer than he deserves. I reached for the wine bottle and refilled my glass, using the movement to hide the fact that I was clenching my jaw. The casual cruelty was bad enough, but what really got to me was how comfortable they were with it. Like insulting me in front of my face, in a language they assumed I couldn't understand, was just good family fun. You okay, honey? Bella asked, and I realized I'd been quiet for a while. You seem a little distant. Just taking it all in, I said, which was true. I was taking it all in. Every word, every insult, every assumption they were making about who I was and what I was worth. The conversation shifted back to Spanish, and Valeria launched into what sounded like a detailed analysis of my perceived shortcomings. Something about how I held my fork, how my laughs sounded too American, how my clothes looked like they came from a discount store. He's like Wonder Bread, she said, and I had to admit that one was actually pretty creative. Soft, white, no substance. Good enough to fill you up, but nothing you'd ever crave. Camila nearly snorted wine through her nose at that one. Valeria, you're terrible, she said, but she was laughing when she said it. I smiled and nodded when they occasionally made eye contact with me, playing my part in their little theater production. The harmless American husband who was just grateful to be included in their sophisticated family dynamic. But inside, I was thinking about something my friend Darren had said to me years ago, back when I was just starting my consulting business and dealing with clients who thought they could intimidate me into lowering my rates. "You know what your problem is, Marcus?" he'd said over beers one night after I'd told him about a particularly brutal meeting. "You think being nice means being weak. But you've got it backward. Being nice when you could destroy someone? That's not weakness. That's power." At the time, I thought he was just trying to make me feel better about getting walked over by some CEO who treated me like hired help. But sitting there at that dinner table, listening to my wife's family tear me apart in a language they thought I couldn't understand, I was starting to see his point. "Tell me, Marcus," Arturo said suddenly, switching back to English. "What do you think of our little family gathering?" The question caught me off guard, partly because of the timing and partly because something in his tone suggested it wasn't as innocent as it sounded. "It's wonderful," I said, raising my glass slightly. "Thank you for welcoming me into your home. The food is incredible, and it's great to finally get to know everyone better." "See," Valeria said in Spanish to her mother. Simpleton responses. No depth whatsoever. "But he's polite," Camila replied. "I'll give him that. Very well-mannered." "Good manners don't make up for lack of substance," Arturo said, still in Spanish. "Bella needs someone who can challenge her intellectually. Someone who can match her fire." "This one's more like a wet blanket," Valeria added. "Pleasant enough, but not exactly exciting." I nodded along with their English conversation while internally translating their Spanish commentary, and I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, exactly, though there was plenty of that. Something colder, more calculating. They thought my smile was weakness. They thought my politeness was evidence of low intelligence. They thought speaking Spanish in front of me was the same as having a private conversation. They were wrong on all three counts. "You're being very quiet tonight," Bella said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "Everything okay?" "Perfect," I said, squeezing back. "Just enjoying the company." And for the first time all evening, that was actually true. I was enjoying this. Not the insults or the condescension, but the knowledge that they were giving me something valuable without even realizing it. They were showing me exactly who they were when they thought no one important was watching. The question was, what was I going to do with that information? I looked around the table at these people who'd spent the entire evening treating me like a piece of furniture they had to tolerate, and I felt that cold calculation crystallize into something sharper. They wanted to see what I was made of? Fine. They were about to find out. After dinner, Bella excused herself to help her mother in the kitchen with coffee and some elaborate dessert presentation that apparently required both of them. I offered to help, playing the eager-to-please son-in-law card, but Camila waved me off with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. No, you're our guest," she said in English. "Sit, relax, enjoy your wine." So there I was, stuck in the living room with Arturo and Valeria, two people who'd spent the last hour and a half discussing my various inadequacies in Spanish while I smiled and nodded like a well-trained dog. Arturo had settled into what was clearly his favorite chair, one of those leather recliners that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. With his whiskey and what looked like a very expensive cigar, he was rolling between his fingers, but not lighting. Valeria had claimed the entire white sofa, stretching out like a cat in a sunbeam. Her wine glass balanced perfectly on her stomach. The silence stretched out between us for maybe 30 seconds before Valeria broke it. "He really is slow, isn't he?" she said in Spanish, not even bothering to lower her voice. "Look at him just sitting there, like a statue." I kept my expression neutral, mildly interested in the conversation I was supposedly not understanding, while internally I was thinking about my old friend Zoe from college. Zoe had been a psychology major who was always analyzing people, always picking apart their motivations and defense mechanisms. She'd had this theory about bullies, that they only targeted people they thought wouldn't fight back. "The thing about passive-aggressive people," she'd said once during one of our long late-night conversations, "is they rely on your politeness to get away with their cruelty. They count on you being too nice, too civilized, too concerned with keeping the peace to call them out on their behavior." At the time, I'd thought she was being cynical. Now, sitting in this pristine living room while two people discussed my character flaws and what they assumed was a foreign language to me, I was starting to think Zoe might have been onto something. I wonder what Bella sees in him, Arturo mused, swirling his whiskey. She's always been attracted to losers, but this one seems particularly bland. Maybe that's the appeal, Valeria replied, examining her manicured nails. After Eduardo and all his drama, maybe she wanted someone who wouldn't challenge her. Someone safe. The word safe came out of her mouth like she was describing a contagious disease. Safe is boring, Arturo said. A woman like Bella needs someone who can match her energy. Someone with passion, with fire. This one, he gestured vaguely in my direction. This one has all the passion of lukewarm soup. I took a sip of wine and let my gaze wander to the family photos arranged on the side table next to my chair. There was one of Bella from what looked like high school graduation, beaming in her cap and gown, while Valeria stood next to her looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. Another one from some tropical vacation. All four of them arranged on a beach somewhere expensive. Everyone smiling, but somehow not looking particularly happy. Do you think he even knows how to satisfy a woman? Valeria asked suddenly, and I had to work very hard to keep my face from reacting to that particular line of inquiry. Probably thinks foreplay is asking if she's ready, Arturo replied, and they both laughed like this was the height of comedy. I remembered another conversation with Zoe, this one from years later when we'd run into each other at a coffee shop in downtown Seattle. She'd been working as a therapist by then, specializing in family dynamics and toxic relationships. You know what I've learned? She'd said, stirring sugar into her latte. The people who are quickest to judge others are usually the ones with the most to hide. It's projection, pure and simple. They point out flaws in other people to distract from their own insecurities. So what do you do about it? I'd asked. Depends, she'd said with a grin that I'd always found slightly unsettling. Sometimes you ignore it. Sometimes you set boundaries. And sometimes, if they've really pushed you too far, you hold up a mirror and make them see exactly what they are. Sitting there listening to Valeria speculate about my sexual competence while her father nodded along like a sage dispensing wisdom, I found myself thinking about mirrors. I bet he's one of those men who thinks women should be grateful for any attention at all, Valeria continued. No imagination, no creativity. Just basic. Bella deserves better, Arturo agreed. Much better. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here were two people who'd spent the entire evening demonstrating their own lack of class, their own cruelty, their own fundamental inability to treat another human being with basic respect, and they were sitting there discussing what Bella deserved. From the kitchen, I could hear the sound of coffee cups clinking and muffled conversation between Bella and her mother. Normal sounds. Domestic sounds. The kind of sounds that should have been comforting but somehow felt ominous given the context. You know what the worst part is? Valeria said, sitting up slightly and fixing me with a stare that she probably thought I couldn't interpret. He actually thinks we like him. Look at that face. He has no idea. She was right about one thing. I did have no idea. No idea how they'd managed to convince themselves that spending an evening systematically insulting their daughter's husband was acceptable behavior. No idea how they'd gotten to be adults without learning basic human decency. No idea how Bella had turned out to be such a good person despite being raised by these people. But I was starting to get some ideas about other things. Ideas about what Zoe had meant when she talked about holding up mirrors. Ideas about the difference between being nice and being weak. Ideas about what happened when you gave people enough rope and then stepped back to watch what they did with it. Poor, stupid Marcus, Valeria said, raising her wine glass in a mock toast. So blissfully unaware. I smiled at her and raised my own glass in response, letting her think she was right. She had no idea how wrong she was about to be. Bella and Camila returned from the kitchen carrying a tray that looked like it belonged in a five-star restaurant. More flan, but this time garnished with fresh berries and what looked like edible gold leaf, accompanied by tiny cups of espresso that probably cost more per ounce than most people's hourly wage. The presentation was flawless, the kind of thing you'd see in a food magazine, and I made sure to express appropriate appreciation. This looks incredible, I said, accepting my portion with what I hoped was the right amount of gratitude and wonder. You really went all out. It's nothing, Camila said with false modesty, but I could see she was pleased with the reaction. Just a little something I threw together. Right, just like the Sistine Chapel was something Michelangelo threw together. I took my first bite and made the appropriate appreciative noises. It really was exceptional, silky smooth, perfectly sweet, with just the right amount of caramel sauce pooled around the edges. Under different circumstances, I might have actually enjoyed it. "Te gusta?" Camila asked, watching me carefully. I looked up with that same mildly confused expression I'd been wearing all evening. "Sorry. She wants to know if you like it," Bella translated, settling back into her chair with her own portion. "It's amazing," I said, turning to Camila with an earnest smile. "Seriously, this is restaurant quality. Maybe better." Camila beamed, and for a moment I almost felt bad about what I was planning to do. Almost. "He's so enthusiastic about everything," Valeria observed in Spanish, delicately picking at her dessert. "Like a golden retriever. Everything is amazing and incredible, and the best thing ever." "Simple minds, simple pleasures," Arturo replied, not even bothering to look at me while he delivered the insult. I took another bite, chewing slowly and deliberately, savoring not just the dessert but the moment. The calm before the storm. The last few minutes of their comfortable superiority before I shattered their little bubble of assumed ignorance. "Look at him eat," Camila said with a laugh. "Like he's never had proper food before. Probably grew up on McDonald's and TV dinners," Valeria added. "You can always tell. No appreciation for real cuisine, real culture." I nodded along with their English conversation while mentally cataloging their Spanish commentary, and I found myself thinking about timing. In business, timing was everything. Strike too early, and you don't have enough information to make your point effectively. Strike too late, and you lose the element of surprise. The key was finding that perfect moment when your opponent had committed fully to their position, when they'd said enough to hang themselves, but not so much that they'd start to suspect something was wrong. "This is delicious," I said to Bella, who was picking at her flan with the distracted air of someone whose mind was elsewhere. "Your mom is an incredible cook." "She is," Bella agreed, but there was something off about her tone, something distant. "He chews like a cow," Valeria said in Spanish, and Arturo snorted with laughter. "No rhythm, no style," he agreed. "Everything about him is so American." The way he said American made it sound like a terminal diagnosis. I took my time with the espresso, which was strong enough to wake the dead and probably cost more than I usually spend on coffee in a month. The bitter richness of it was the perfect counterpoint to the sweet dessert, and I made sure to compliment that too. "The coffee is perfect," I said. "I don't think I've ever had espresso this good." "He probably drinks that swill from Starbucks," Camila said in Spanish. "Thinks a Vinny caramel macchiato is sophisticated. With extra whipped cream," Valeria added, and they all laughed like this was the most hilarious thing they'd ever heard. I smiled and nodded, playing my part in their little performance. The ignorant American who was so grateful to be included in their sophisticated world that he'd sit there and smile while they mocked everything about him. But I was also counting. Every insult, every assumption, every casual cruelty they thought I couldn't understand. Building my case, piece by piece, word by word. "You know what I love about family dinners like this?" I said suddenly, setting down my espresso cup and looking around the table with genuine warmth. "It's so nice to be able to just relax and be yourself around people who really know you." There was a moment of silence where everyone seemed to be processing what I'd said. That's beautiful, honey," Bella said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "I'm so glad you feel comfortable here." "Oh, I do," I said, squeezing back. "Your family has been so honest with me tonight. So genuine. It's refreshing, really." Valeria and Arturo exchanged a look that I pretended not to notice. Something was starting to shift in the atmosphere of the room, a subtle change in the energy that suggested at least one of them was beginning to wonder if there might be more to the quiet American than they'd initially assumed. "Well," Valeria said carefully, "we believe in authenticity in this family." "I can tell," I said, taking another sip of espresso. "You all seem very comfortable expressing yourselves." Another pause, longer this time. I finished the last bite of flan, savoring the sweetness, and set my spoon down with deliberate precision. The silence stretched out between us, and I could feel everyone watching me, waiting to see what I'd do next. It was time. I stood up slowly, deliberately, the way I'd learned to do in boardrooms when I needed to command attention without seeming aggressive. Every eye in the room followed me as I reached for my wine glass, lifting it in what looked like a toast. The silence was so complete I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, the distant hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the soft whisper of the central air conditioning moving through the vents. Gracias por la cena, I said clearly, letting each syllable hang in the air like a dropped bomb. Thank you for dinner. The effect was immediate and electric. Valeria's wine glass froze halfway to her lips. Camila's fork clattered against her plate. Arturo leaned forward, so suddenly his leather chair creaked in protest. Bella's mouth fell open in a perfect O of shock. For maybe 5 seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. They just stared at me like I'd suddenly sprouted a second head or started speaking in tongues. Valeria started, then stopped, her brain clearly struggling to process what had just happened. Speak Spanish. I finished for her, switching back to English with a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. Yeah, I do. Fluently, actually. Have for about 15 years now. The color drained from Camila's face. Arturo's grip tightened around his whiskey glass. Bella looked like she was about to be sick. How long have you? She started. The whole time, I said, still standing, still holding my wine glass like a weapon. Every word, every insult, every casual cruelty you thought I was too stupid to understand. I turned to Valeria first, the way a prosecutor might address their star witness. Valeria, I said, my voice conversational, almost friendly. You called me Wonder Bread. Soft, white, no substance. You said I looked cheap, that I had a gas station laugh, that I chewed like a cow with no rhythm or style. You speculated about my sexual competence and suggested I probably think foreplay is asking if she's ready. Valeria's face went from pale to red to pale again, like someone was adjusting the color settings on a TV. I also heard you say, I continued, switching back to perfect Spanish, that poor Bella married a man who shops at Walmart and has no appreciation for real culture. Marcus. Bella started, but I held up a hand. I'm not finished, I said, turning to Camila. Mrs. Rivera, you said I was simple but sweet, like that was some kind of compliment. You wondered if I was smart enough to handle a successful Latina woman. You laughed when your daughter called me enthusiastic like a golden retriever, and you suggested I probably grew up on McDonald's and TV dinners because I have no appreciation for real cuisine. Camila opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. I turned to Arturo last, saving the best for the patriarch of this charming family. And you, sir, I said, my voice dropping to something just above a whisper. You questioned my earning potential, suggested I was a loser like all of Bella's previous boyfriends, said I had all the passion of lukewarm soup, and wondered what your daughter could possibly see in someone so bland and boring. Arturo's jaw worked silently, like a fish pulled out of water. You also said, I continued in Spanish, that I probably don't know how to satisfy a woman, that I have no imagination or creativity, and that Bella deserves much better than someone like me. The silence that followed was deafening. I could see them all trying to process what had just happened, trying to figure out how to respond to being caught so completely and thoroughly in their own web of assumptions and cruelty. I want you to understand something, I said, setting my wine glass down on the table with deliberate care. I didn't reveal this earlier because I was curious. I wanted to see who you really were when you thought no one important was listening. And you know what? You showed me exactly that. Marcus, please, Bella tried again. You want to know what I think is really interesting? I continued, looking around the table at their stunned faces. For the last 2 hours, you've been discussing my lack of class, my poor manners, my inability to appreciate sophistication. But what's classy about insulting your daughter's husband to his face in a language you think he can't understand? What's sophisticated about spending an entire dinner mocking someone's appearance, their background, their profession? I leaned forward slightly, my hands flat on the table. You criticized my clothes, my laugh, my eating habits, my conversation skills. You questioned my intelligence, my masculinity, my worthiness to be part of this family. You did all of this while I sat here, smiled politely, complimented your food, and tried to be a gracious guest in your home. We didn't mean, Camila started. Yes, you did, I cut her off. You meant every word. The only thing you didn't mean was for me to understand it. I straightened up, adjusting my jacket, the same jacket Valeria had dismissed as Walmart chic. Here's what's really funny, I said, switching back to Spanish one final time. You spent all evening talking about how I'm not good enough for Bella. But after tonight, I'm wondering if maybe the real question is whether your family is good enough for me." The words hit like a slap across the face. Valeria gasped. Arturo's face turned purple. Camila looked like she might faint. "Marcus." Bella stood up so fast her chair nearly fell over. "How could you say that to my family?" I looked at my wife, really looked at her, and saw not the woman I'd fallen in love with, but someone I was only just beginning to understand. "The same way they could say what they said about me, I guess," I said quietly. "The only difference is, I waited until I was sure they meant it." The aftermath of my revelation was like watching a slow-motion car crash. Nobody seemed to know how to react, how to process the fact that their evening of casual cruelty had just blown up in their faces. Camila was the first to try damage control. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor, and started gathering plates with the frantic energy of someone trying to pretend nothing had happened. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," she said in English, her voice pitched higher than usual. We didn't mean anything by it. It's just how we talk, you know?" Family teasing. I almost laughed. Family teasing. Right. Because nothing says family bonding like spending 2 hours systematically destroying someone's character in a language you think they can't understand. "Teasing," I repeated, letting the word hang in the air. "Is that what you call questioning my intelligence, my masculinity, my ability to satisfy your daughter, and my worthiness to be part of this family?" Valeria finally found her voice, though it came out as more of a croak. "You were supposed to be. I mean, we thought you were. The dumb one," I suggested helpfully. "Yeah, I got that impression." Arturo had been silent through this whole exchange, but now he cleared his throat and leaned back in his chair with what looked like an attempt to regain his composure. "Son," he said, and I could hear him trying to inject some authority back into his voice. "I think you're overreacting. Every family has their own way of—" "Don't." I cut him off, my voice sharp enough to make him flinch. "Don't call me son, and don't try to gaslight me about what I heard with my own ears. You spent the evening discussing what a disappointment I am, how Bella could do better, how I'm basically a waste of space with no class, no culture, and no redeeming qualities. Those weren't jokes. Those were character assassinations." "Marcus, please," Bella said, and I could hear the desperation creeping into her voice. "They didn't know you could understand them. If they had known, they would have been more careful about hiding their contempt," I finished. "That doesn't make the contempt any less real, Bella. It just makes it more cowardly." I looked around the table at their faces, shock, embarrassment, anger, and something that might have been fear. They were scrambling, trying to figure out how to salvage this situation, how to put the genie back in the bottle. "Look," Valeria said, attempting a laugh that came out strangled. "This is all just a big misunderstanding. We were being silly, maybe a little too honest after the wine, but we didn't mean any harm. You called me Wonder Bread," I said flatly. "You said I had the personality of lukewarm soup. You speculated about whether I knew how to please a woman. You laughed about my clothes, my mannerisms, my background. In what universe is any of that harmless?" "We were just," she started. "You were just being yourselves," I said. "That's exactly the problem." Bella moved toward me, reaching out like she was going to touch my arm, but I stepped back. The hurt that flashed across her face almost made me feel bad. "Almost. Honey, I know they can seem a little intense," she said, "but they really do care about me, about us. They just need time to get to know you better." "Get to know me better?" I stared at her in disbelief. "Bella, they spent 2 hours cataloging everything they think is wrong with me. They didn't ask about my work, my interests, my goals, my dreams. They didn't try to get to know me at all. They just made assumptions and then spent the evening congratulating themselves on how much better they are than the pathetic loser you married." "That's not fair," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "What's not fair," I said, "is sitting in someone's home as their guest and having to listen to them tear you apart while you smile and pretend not to understand." I walked over to the side table where I'd left my keys, feeling all of their eyes following me. The weight of their stares should have been uncomfortable, but instead it felt liberating. For the first time all evening, I wasn't pretending to be anything other than exactly who I was. "Marcus, where are you going?" Bella asked. "Home," I said simply. "This dinner is over." "You can't just leave," she said, following me toward the front door. We need to talk about this. We need to work this out. I stopped in the foyer and turned to face her. She looked smaller somehow, standing there in her black dress with her perfect hair and her desperate expression. For a moment, I remembered falling in love with her laugh at that charity gala, the way she'd tucked her hair behind her ear when she was nervous. What exactly do you want to work out? I asked. Do you want your family to apologize for spending the evening insulting me? Do you want them to pretend they didn't mean what they said? Or do you want me to pretend I didn't hear it? I want us to get past this, she said. I want my family to see how wonderful you are. They had their chance, I said. They chose to see me as a joke instead. You embarrassed them, she said, and there was something in her tone that made me look at her more carefully. You humiliated my family in their own home. There it was. The truth she'd been dancing around since I'd started speaking Spanish. She wasn't upset that her family had insulted me. She was upset that I'd called them out on it. I embarrassed them? I repeated slowly. Bella, they embarrassed themselves. I just translated it. You could have said something earlier, she insisted. You could have let them know you understood Spanish instead of letting them think. Instead of letting them reveal who they really are? I shook my head. No, I'm glad I waited. Because now I know exactly what your family thinks of me, and more importantly, I know what you think about me standing up for myself. I opened the front door, letting the cool evening air wash over me. It felt like breathing for the first time in hours. Don't do this, Bella said, but she didn't move to stop me. Don't walk away from us. I looked back at her one more time, standing there in the doorway of her parents' mansion, and I realized something that should have been obvious from the beginning. She wasn't angry at her family for disrespecting me. She was angry at me for refusing to take it quietly. I'm not walking away from anything, I said. I'm walking towards something better. And for the first time in my life, I walked out of somewhere feeling taller than when I'd walked in. The first 3 days after the dinner were radio silence. No calls, no texts, no attempts at reconciliation from anyone in Bella's family. I wasn't sure if they were giving me space to cool off, or if they were hoping I'd come crawling back with an apology for overreacting to their casual cruelty. On Thursday morning, my phone buzzed with a text from Bella. Can we talk? I miss you. I stared at the message for a long time, sitting in my kitchen with my morning coffee, watching the steam rise from my mug and thinking about everything that had changed in the space of one dinner. 3 simple words that should have meant something, but somehow felt empty after what had happened. I didn't reply. Friday brought another text, this one longer. I know you're hurt, and I understand why. But walking away isn't going to solve anything. We're married, Marcus. We're supposed to work through problems together. The thing was, I didn't feel like we had a problem to work through. I felt like we had a fundamental incompatibility that had finally been exposed. She saw her family's behavior as something to be managed and overlooked. I saw it as something that should never have happened in the first place. I still didn't reply. Saturday morning, I was surprised to get a text from Valeria. I didn't know you were listening. 5 words that somehow managed to be both an acknowledgement and a complete avoidance of responsibility at the same time. She didn't know I was listening, so that made it okay. She didn't apologize for what she'd said, just for getting caught saying it. I deleted the message without responding. Sunday, I called Darren. So let me get this straight, he said after I told him the whole story. Your wife's family spent an entire dinner roasting you in Spanish, thinking you couldn't understand, and when you finally called them out on it, your wife got mad at you for embarrassing them. That's the short version, yeah. Jesus, Marcus. I could hear him shaking his head through the phone. You always were the dangerous kind. What do you mean? Most people would have exploded in the moment, made a scene, maybe thrown some plates around. But you? You sat there, collected evidence, built your case, and then delivered it like a closing argument. Cold, calculated, devastating. I don't know about devastating. Are you kidding me? You destroyed their entire worldview in about 5 minutes. They thought they had you figured out, the harmless American husband who was too dumb to catch on to their little games. Instead, you turned out to be the guy who speaks their language better than they thought and has more class in his little finger than they have in their entire family. Maybe he was right. Maybe what I'd done was more than just standing up for myself. Maybe I'd shattered something fundamental in how they saw the world, how they categorized people, how they justified their own behavior. Monday, I did something I'd been thinking about since the night of the dinner. I drove to the community library and signed up to volunteer teaching Spanish conversation classes. Any particular reason you want to teach Spanish? asked Maria, the volunteer coordinator, as she showed me around the program. I think there are a lot of people out there who could benefit from understanding what's really being said around them, I told her. She laughed. Sounds like there's a story there. Isn't there always? The first class was small, just 6 people, ranging from a college student trying to improve her grades to a retired businessman who wanted to be able to talk to his new neighbors. They were eager, attentive, grateful for the opportunity to learn something new. "Why did you start teaching?" asked Jennifer, the college student, after our second session. I thought about how to answer that. I could have told her about the dinner, about sitting there listening to insults in a language my wife's family assumed I couldn't understand. I could have explained about the power dynamics of language, about how being underestimated could sometimes be turned into an advantage. Instead, I said, because sometimes the best defense is being fluent when people think you're deaf. She nodded like that made perfect sense, even though I wasn't sure it did. Weekends became my time for hiking. I'd drive out to the state parks, find trails I'd never explored before, spend hours walking through woods that didn't care about family drama or linguistic power plays or the difference between being nice and being weak. It was on one of these hikes that I met Layla. She was sitting on a boulder overlooking the valley, sketching something in a notebook when I came around the bend in the trail. She looked up when she heard my footsteps and smiled. One of those genuine smiles that immediately made me feel like the day had gotten a little brighter. "Beautiful view," I said, stopping to catch my breath. "It really is," she agreed. "I come here to think sometimes. Clear my head." We ended up talking for an hour, sitting on that boulder while the sun moved across the sky and cast different shadows on the valley below. She told me she worked in cultural mediation, helping families navigate conflicts that arose from different backgrounds, different expectations, different ways of communicating. "It's fascinating work," she said. "You'd be amazed how many problems come down to people making assumptions about each other without ever actually having a real conversation." "That sounds familiar," I said. "Are you bilingual?" she asked suddenly. "There's something about the way you speak that makes me think you've spent time thinking about language, about how different words can mean different things to different people." I thought about how to answer that, about all the different ways I could explain my relationship with Spanish, with communication, with the space between what people say and what they mean. "I speak Spanish," I said finally. "Fluently. I learned it for work, but I kept studying it because I realized there was something powerful about understanding what people really mean when they think you can't follow the conversation." She tilted her head, studying me with curiosity rather than judgment. "That sounds like it comes with a story," she said. I smiled, watching a hawk circle over the valley below us. "Doesn't everything?"